two separate topics. On the first half, we'll be taking a closer look at the two-day youth conference, which was held in Aswan on Friday and Saturday, and later on in the hour at the 30th ordinary session of the African Union Executive Council, which opened in Addis Ababa on Thursday, days before the annual meeting of the Assembly of the Heads of State and Government, which kicks off tomorrow. Now, let's start off by me telling you a little bit about the monthly youth conference which took place in Aswan over the past 2 days. It's part of a decision that was taken by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to hold regular youth conferences across the country to tackle key issues affecting the country's younger generation. During this round, President el-Sisi discussed a host of local and regional issues. He also announced a number of government decisions, including the establishment of an authority for the development of Upper Egypt, which is tasked with creating jobs and maintaining Nubian monuments with investments of up to 5 billion Egyptian pounds. Now, the second monthly youth conference brought together some 1,300 young people from Upper Egyptian governorates and was attended by a number of high-ranking officials, ministers, as well as members of parliament. What was the most important points covered throughout the conference? What were its most significant outcomes? And how does my guest evaluate the conference in general? That's what we're going to be discussing on the first half of the programme. Second, in the hour, we'll be taking a look at the 30th ordinary session of the African Union Executive Council, which was opened in Addis Ababa on Thursday, days before the annual Assembly of the Heads of State and Government meeting, which is also taking place tomorrow. The participants of the summit agreed that in order to meet the goals of the Agenda 2063, member countries need to revive and strengthen the spirit of Pan-Africanism across the countries. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi earlier arrived to participate in the General Assembly meetings. Can Africa reach the goals of the Agenda 2063? What are the expected decisions that will be taken during the conference and the Assembly meetings? What were some of the most important meetings that Minister Sameh Shoukry has held? He's been there for a while. That's what we're going to be discussing later on in the programme. But as usual, there's always another top story making headlines, and today's story is international headline news, because we're taking a look at Donald Trump, who was to speak by phone with various world leaders amid growing international alarm and a legal challenge over his moves to drastically limit Muslim immigration to the United States. In a flurry of telephone calls that started early in the morning and was to last throughout the day, Trump was to speak with the White House with 5 foreign ministers, including Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and France's François Hollande, and Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. The conversations gave the US President an early opportunity to explain new policies that have baffled the unnerved much of the world, including several states here in the Arab region in the Middle East, who have expressed alarm at his decision to stop people from Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Libya from entering the United States for a period of 90 days. Now, to tell us more about this decision and how he views it is Dr. Hassan Wagih, Professor of Linguistics and Political Science. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Dr. Hassan, let me just ask you how you evaluate, or how do you see, rather, the decisions taken by Trump when it comes to banning the traveling of people from these mainly Muslim countries?
Actually, the concept of migration and immigration in the United States of America is very, very vital and very important, and one of the pillars on which the United States culture is built on. This is a culture of an immigrant. So why there is some sort of uprising or a negative response to what President Trump, the decision taken by President Trump. The problem is that this is a very basic concept the Americans lived on for a long period of time. It is a concept of melting pot, where you melt all the immigrants in pot, the melting pot, the American dream, the concept of migration, the songs, and the cultural maxims are there to stay, and the United States of American people would like to see that this concept has a continuation, and they don't want to see this. But when it comes to Muslims, there is another news item that I've heard, which says his decision is not directed against Muslims. So we have to make sure of the information.
How is it not directed towards Muslims, Dr. Hassan?
Actually, his main problem when it comes to immigrants from Hispanic origin and from Mexico. And especially
that was because of the war. This decision is exclusively to stop people from traveling in from Syria, Sudan, Libya, Iraq, as well as Iran.
But I have heard that it's also for the Hispanic thing. And the Hispanic thing and the Hispanic issue is many people wrote about it, like Huntington, the writer of the Clash of Civilization, the famous book, which is being implemented by some practices and some policies in the United States and outside the United States. And actually the Hispanic interference is a threat to them. But if this is directed to certain people, he felt like the attacks that took place in Europe because of some of the immigrants who came under the Syrian nationality, and some of them were involved in some riots and some trouble. Actually, instead of the problem is double standard. Instead of looking at the roots of the problem of immigrants and solving it in their homeland and in other arrangements, the United States should be a safe haven for places like that, because this is a concept that all Americans lived on for a long period of time. So whether it's for Arabic Islamic countries or whether for the Hispanic, there is a threat and they feel the threat, they have the perception of the threat, and out of that perception, they took the decision, and Trump took the decision.
Okay, I thank you very much, Dr. Hassan Waghi, Professor of Political Science, for your time and your thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, our first report for the evening, and a closer look at the second monthly youth conference that was held in Aswan over the weekend, and then I'll be back with my guest here in the studio. Stay tuned.
Fattah al-Sisi announced on Saturday a number of government decisions, including the establishment of an authority for the development of Upper Egypt, which is tasked with creating jobs and maintaining Nubian monuments, with investments of up to 5 billion Egyptian pounds. During the closing ceremony of the second monthly youth conference in Aswan, President Sisi announced the launching of a national project to create several industrial zones for micro and small industries, as well as the establishment of 200 small factories in all Upper Egyptian governorates over the next 6 months. Sisi also announced the expanding of the Takaful and Karama social safety program in Upper Egypt to include creating employment for the offspring of families eligible for the program. The Social Solidarity Ministry's Takaful and Karama program, established by the government in early 2015, is a national social safety net program aimed at protecting the poor through income support. President Sisi said the government aims to make Aswan the capital of the African economy and culture, as well as review the possibility of compensating those who were negatively affected by the building of the high dam in the 1960s. The president stated that he instructed the government to take measures to prompt the quality of living for Upper Egyptians, highlighting the efforts to develop the area in Upper Egypt. 238 projects were launched to develop 3,258 school classes, with 179 new classes built through an Egyptian-Japanese joint program. President Sisi added that the Takaful and Karama program covers more than 1,700 villages in Upper Egypt. The program allocates 82% of its funding for Upper Egyptian governorates with a total of about 1.1 million households and has increased funding for food in schools to cover more than 9,400 schools at a cost of 850 million Egyptian pounds in the academic year 2016-2017. In the area of electricity and energy projects, a power plant with a capacity of 4,000 megawatts has been established in Bani Suef governorate with a total investment of 2 billion euros. In Asyut, a power station with a total capacity of 1,000 megawatt has been built at the cost of $746 million. President Sisi also stated that Egyptian railroads require 180 million Egyptian pounds for development at a time when the state cannot increase the price of train tickets. Sisi underlined the importance of developing a public culture in Egypt that is aware that any service has to be paid for, else services deteriorates and end. According to the president, since 2014, the country has been working effectively on developmental projects, but added the state used to provide services for the people but did not receive anything in return. Thus, services deteriorate. The two-day youth conference taking place in the southern city of Aswan brought together 1,300 young people from Upper Egyptian governorates. The conference was attended by a number of MPs and ministers. The decision to hold regular youth conferences was made at the first annual National Youth Conference in October, when over 3,000 young people from a number of the country's universities and political parties attended the National Youth Conference in the Sinai resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. The first monthly follow-up conference was in December.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to welcome here in the studio Dr. Mohammed Abdel Halim, political analyst. Thank you very much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Let me start off by asking you about how you saw the outcomes of this second follow-up meeting of the annual National Youth Conference.
Right. That sort of conference, as a matter of fact, came to be regarded as very much successful, very much promising, so to speak. The inauguration speech by our own political leadership, Abdel Fattah Sisi, was very much encouraging youth every now and again, very much prompting them into, transcending the barriers and the limits between what you might call the presidential authority and the ordinary citizen, actually. At the very beginning, he seems to be quite very much keeping an eye on youth, on people of Upper Egypt, right. Very much concentrating on that very much dear and very much a precious part, actually, of Egypt, very much distant one indeed. And here lies one of the most important issues, the fact that the political leadership is very much concentrating, actually, not on those areas and those, districts that came to be regarded as what you might call of ex-cathedral authority, areas in which, the zoom of the camera would seem to be quite concentrated, capital and big cities such as Cairo, Alexandria, but is very much keeping an eye on those distant areas just by way of putting an end for, the sort of the rumors that had spread here, there, and everywhere about the marginalization of those people, about how those people are sidelined, how they are to be very much, isolated from the rest of the scene. And this is another, testimony to the fact that the presidential authority actually is very much keeping an eye on not only those upper middle class people actually in the society, but those middle class aspects of the Egyptian society. The process of choosing Aswan as in itself, it really is actually, has got another symbolic testimony to the fact that no matter how distant those areas would seem to be, no matter how far-fetched they may seem to be as well, actually, there are no barriers, actually, here, there, and everywhere. And Fattah Sisi is very much keen, actually, to reach almost every single individual inch in Egypt to solve the problematic situations, particularly those of youth, as
what do you
think
were the most important topics discussed during the two-day conference?
Well, investment being part and parcel of the daily routine, maximization of the daily prices, actually, and, the power, the electricity, the gas, and the process of education. A large number of issues, actually, and a large number of parliamentary figures also did occur, in addition to a large number of very much pertinent ministers that are answering every now and again in a very straightforward and very much direct way, the questions on the part of those youth.
Right. You spoke that investment obviously was one of the key issues or the themes, and obviously there was the investment in micro and small-sized businesses. Now, telling me a little bit about the importance of investing in small and medium-sized investments.
Right. You know, the large average of the population of Egypt actually used to be actually what you might call beyond the poverty line.
Right.
Not all of them, actually, but a large number of them. And here lies the significance, actually, of the concentration and the prime preoccupation on the part of Al-Fattah al-Sisi, actually, to keep an eye on those people who are aiming and aspiring and dreaming every now and again to reach to a sort of a micro-project or very much minimized project without no avail for quite a long period of time, because a large number of tussles, problematic situations, and the problem of finance as well. The fact that he's trying to ease the situation every now and again, he's trying to pave the way for them, encouraging them every now and again by his own friendly talk at the very beginning, actually, that would enkindle the hearts of those youngsters, actually, that are very much aspiring for more, for changing their own future. They have got the fortitude, they have got the courage, they have got almost what you might call every conceivable respect at their own disposal to change their own existence. But the confrontation with the highest and the most supreme distinctive authority in Egypt, that is the political leadership, would pave the way for them, actually, would pacify all their own dreams and aspirations. And I think the sense of, extreme sense of friendliness and kindness on the part of Al-Fattah al-Sisi actually would, you know, I mean, throughout the conference for a couple of days, you know, external as much as internal signs of kindness are very much apparent.
Right.
That would ease all the problematic situations for all those youngsters.
How will developing small and medium-sized enterprises in Upper Egypt obviously help the area itself and also help the national economy as a whole?
Right. Being a very important and very much distant, as I've just said at the very beginning, distant part of Egypt, actually, it has been, as it might have been said, actually, very much marginalized for quite a long period of time. Use at that district, that very much distant part of Aswan, for example, for quite a long period of time have been very much, I mean, sidelined and marginalized, and as such, they are looking for changing their own prospects, and they are looking for, you know, I mean, meeting that sort of distinctive authority. And in the meantime, keeping every now and again to ask about how they would change their own future by initiating, by inaugurating these micro projects and these minimized ones, actually. And I think that Mr. President Al-Fattah al-Sisi is very much encouraging them, actually, just by way of paving the way for putting in for all their own economic tussles and economic, you know, instabilities on a large scale. Yeah. And that was quite obvious from the sort of the give and take dialogue between those, you know, I mean, youngsters, those youths and, you know, and Mr. President Al-Fattah al-Sisi, actually. Right. And the sort of give and take dialogue and the sort of posing questions and the readiness on his own part in any conceivable respect to try to answer with a great deal of kindness, actually, with frankness, with straightforwardness, with directness, so to speak.
One of the outcomes of the annual youth conference, which was held back in October of last year, was the establishment of the Takaful and Karama social safety program. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about this program and what were some of the discussions with regards to what its achievements during this particular conference?
Yeah, that sort of conference, actually, as you might have said, rightly so, I mean, rightly done, was just a link in the chain. It's one of the links of the chain of the continuation of the process of establishing and of remote, you know, of promoting the interests of those youth, actually. Right. That was held in October at Sharm el-Sheikh last year. And in the meantime, signs of dignity and respectability actually came to be regarded as part and parcel of their own daily needs. For example, I still remember during the previous conference that the youth would ask every now and again, Mr. President, of, you know, of releasing actually those detainees, of those youngsters that are imprisoned for political reasons. That was on the top of their own agenda. That was on the top of their own, you know, I mean, demands, actually. And by lapse of time, it came to be regarded part and parcel of the truth. The fact that by a presidential pardon, Mr. Al-Fattah al-Sisi would release a large number of them, those people or those youngsters or those students who had not been detained, you know, on criminal reasons, on criminal groundings, but just for political reasons, actually. came to be regarded as very much encouraging those people to continue the process of the communication with their own presidential authority, actually.
Right. The conference saw the president announce that the government aims to make Aswan the capital of the African economy as well as culture.
Yeah.
How did you see this particular move?
The fact that immediately after the revolution of the 25th of January, tourism in Egypt sometimes up, sometimes down, actually, passing through a large number of tribulations. That's why I think that symbolic visit and that sort of a journey on the part of Mr. Fattah al-Sisi to Aswan is just a life kiss, actually, for tourism, as a large number of political analysts would say. It's one way of revitalizing, you know, the sort of the tourists that had been, you know, I mean, forsaken for quite a long period of time. It's a clear testimony to the, you know, international community here, there, and everywhere, to the European world and to the American citizens, actually, that Egypt, particularly Aswan, is a land of peace. It's the land of, you know, I mean, history, despite the fact that a large number of allegations during the previous periods would allegate and would propagate the fact that it's full of, you know, illegal immigrants, of terrorist acts and actions. It is far from being safe and secure. But I think that this symbolic as much as historic visit, actually, to Aswan would leave a very deep impact, not only on a local level, but on an international scene in the meantime, inviting those people every now and again in an indirect way to come to Egypt to invest their own fortunes and their own large sums of money, actually, to establish a large number of factories and of businesses, of you know, I mean, large number of investment. Particularly, you know, I mean, when, you know, Mr. Fattah al-Sisi was, you know, at one time very much idling and very much walking with a great deal of peace of mind, taking that sort of symbolic coach and the coachman on the River Nile that would give an impression for almost all the people that, you know, Aswan is, you know, a hotbed for security. It's a suitable place for immunity. It's one of the, you know, I mean, most peaceful places in the world, actually, for all tourists to come in. That symbolic visit, that symbolic gesture, that symbolic scene of Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi riding the coach side by side to the River Nile is one of the greatest testimonies to the fact that, well, I mean, this is the land of history that is free from any sort of idleness, free from any sort of terrorist acts and actions.
Part of the president's agenda has always been to listen to the Egyptian youth and for them to have a say, be it in every aspect, perhaps, of Egyptian life, be it education, healthcare, etc., and to listen to their ideas. How important has that been, and how empowering do you think it is for Egyptian youth?
The fact that during the course of the conference for a couple of days, 27 and 28, and then Friday and Saturday, actually, we could really detect and we could really discover from the sort of the communication, from the sort of the give and take dialogue between the youth on the one hand and Mr. President on the other, a great deal of frankness, directness, straightforwardness. I still remember, you know, the episode, that very much famous episode of a young man called Ala Mustafa, actually, who would ask very much prompt and very much direct and very much to outward seeming, you know, offensive questions about the sort of the drainage, about the contamination of the water of the River Nile, of how, you know, I mean, those companies are very much keen to effuse and to pour that sort of residues and that sort of, you know, I mean, dirty parts actually within, and that sort of waste within the River Nile. And I think at this stage, the man that Mr. Fattah al-Sisi turned out to be very much realistic. And very much keen of looking and of solving one of the problems that was devastating the Aswani land and the Aswani people for quite a long period of time. Throughout, you know, I mean, 5 or 6 years, previous 5 or 6 years, you have heard of the sort of the contamination of the drainage of all those, you know, I mean, residues and so that's, and actually, but without the least attempt actually to change the scene, despite the fact that ministers every now and again are trying to do something. But, you know, I mean, here particularly, we could really detect a great deal of keenness on the part of Mr. Fattah al-Sisi. The fact that he is not very much satisfied at just answering him, of just promising young man actually of how he would solve the problem in the due course of time, but he insists every now and again to take that sort of young man and accompany him actually to the drainage location itself. And in the meantime, asking Mustafa Mutawalli, actually, I mean, the Minister of population and of housing, to try to, within a very much limited period of time, to solve the problem, to come to a 0 point, actually. And in the meantime, providing of 3 filterizing, mechanical ways to try to change the whole situation. And this would give us the impression that not only that sort of situation would strike the highest example of democracy, of the sort of abolishing all the barriers here, there, and everywhere between the political leadership on one hand and the population, you understand? But in the meantime, of realistic attitude, of very much pragmatic ways of solving, of putting an end for large number of problematic situations that the Aswani people would go through for quite a long period of time. The fact that Mr. Fattah Sisi strikes one of the highest and one of the most significant examples of presidents in the Middle East, actually, of how they are very much keen for the hygienic state, for the central issues, actually, of almost all their own citizens. You understand?
Yes.
So, I mean, this is very much, promising and very much, abolishing the barriers and striking a very good example of solving all the problematic situations right from the very beginning. And all of us, actually, we are very much, interested in that sort of particular situation to a greater extent.
Dr. Mohammed Abdul Halim, political analyst, I thank you very much for coming in tonight and for your insights. Ladies and gentlemen, our second report for the evening and a closer look at the 30th ordinary session of the African Union Executive Council, which kicked off in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa on Thursday. And then we'll be back to welcome my second guest for the evening. Stay tuned.
Days before the annual Assembly of the Heads of State and Government meeting, the 30th Ordinary Session of the African Union AU Executive Council opened in Addis Ababa on Thursday. The General Assembly, dubbed Demographic Dividend through Investments in Youth, kicked off in Addis Ababa on the 22nd of January and will conclude on the 31st of January. The session was officially opened with a remark of the outgoing chairperson of the African Union Commission, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. In her remarks, the chairperson underscored that to meet the goals of Agenda 2063, member countries needs to revive and strengthen the spirit of Pan-Africanism across the continent. She further said that Africa needs to transform through economic integration by honoring the AU's decision to establish a continental free trade area by 2017. The Executive Council will prepare the agenda of the AU Summit with appropriate recommendations for consideration by the heads of state and government. Summit scheduled to take place from the 30th to the 31st of January 2017. The meeting of the Council brought together ministers from the AU member states, the Permanent Representative Committee based in Addis Ababa, representatives of the UN, ECA, and heads of AU organs, among others. The 28th Ordinary Session of the Summit of the African Union Heads of State and Government will chart the continent's development agenda, including the appointment of a new chairperson for the African Union Commission. One of the key issues at the meeting will be election of a new leader for the African Union Commission. For his part, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry arrived in Ethiopia on Thursday to attend the ministerial level African Union meeting ahead of President Fattah Sisi's participation in the AU's 28th General Assembly by the end of the month. Aside from participating in the Assembly's official meetings and activities, Shoukry met on the sidelines with his African counterparts as well as EU commissioners, including from Nigeria, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, Burundi, Sudan, and Algeria. In a presidential level AU meeting in July, President Sisi told his counterparts that there is no substitute for adopting a model of regional integration in Africa. Sisi also advocated the creation of a free trade zone between AU countries.
Joining me for the second half of the program is African Affairs expert Dr. Farouk Shaqweer. Thank you very much for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
Let me start off by asking you, obviously, about your opinion or how you think, or what you think rather, are going to be the most important points discussed during this session.
This session is having very important points concerning the future of Africa itself. One of the important items is the election of the EU commissioner and the 8 commissioners as well. The second important point is restructuring the African Union itself and the creating sustainability in finance. And the most important maybe, how to develop the potentialities for the youth in Africa to be as a wealth instead of being a crisis or a burden on the continent.
Right.
These are basically the three major points. Of course, there are some, regular documents presented to the summit tomorrow, like the results of the subcommittees concerning the childhood, the problem of health, the problem of civil wars, and these things are normal documents during the summit itself.
Right. The General Assembly theme is harnessing the demographic dividend through investments in the youth. What do you make of this title?
If you look at the demographic picture in the continent, this is a very crucial point in the future of the continent. Africa is the youngest continent in the world. It has almost 60% of its population within the age of workforce.
Right.
In 2050, Africa will be the second major powerhouse as a labor source for the whole world after East Asia. And this, as a matter of fact, is a major problem for the continent, and in the same time, it's also a great potential.
Right.
I give you an example for how the potentials coming from. The first important thing is the agriculture. The agribusiness industry in the continent is a major source of wealth.
Right.
So Africa has 26% of the world arable land. It contains also 10% of the fresh water in the world. But what we need is to develop such sources. Plus, we have also the labor force. Africa imports about 35 billion foodstuff each year, while this importation can be, utilized for other purposes to industrialize the continent if we are able to develop our agricultural resources. This is an example. So how to do this? We need, of course, we need investment. We need money. And this will redirect the intention of our leaders how to make Africa is more attractive for investment by creating infrastructure, proper infrastructure, by creating amiable environment, by creating less civil wars. And this will, of course, make Africa to be on the top of investment. As a matter of fact, Africa is the most giving returns for investors. It's the best. I mean, maybe the highest now.
Right.
So to count on that means that we are having the potential to do that, and the way of doing it is to redirect our labor resources to this way.
Right. Obviously, we spoke a little bit about the youth and empowering them. I wanted to know the importance of that and of obviously having or being more inclusive, with governments being more inclusive. I mean, as we just seen just yesterday, we had a youth conference here in the country. How can Egypt pass on its know-how or its own approach to other African countries when it comes to including the youth in all forms of life?
The African institutions like the African Development Bank has started already such a way, and assigned, I think last year, assigned about 24 billion US dollar to develop projects for employing The first phase will include about 10,000 youth in the projects, and this is going to be repeated in every country. At the same time, this will attract many resources to the same direction. As we can see in the last few years, the youth created a lot of difficulties in the continent. You can see the cases in Cote d'Ivoire. You can see the cases also in, still cases in Somalia, still cases in Mali. This is, you know, the new generation has no opportunities. They don't have, they look at the future, they don't have future.
Right.
Then, unless you create such future for them, then they have to, they have no other way except to go to the terrorist groups,
yes,
or to do harm to their countries.
Right. Part of the talks will focus on the Agenda 2063. What can you tell us about this agenda and its aims and what has been achieved from it thus far?
You know, the African Union, as a matter of fact, is the pillar for directing the continent to its integrity, to its integration, to its prosperity and peace. This is the vision of the African Union. And in the last couple of decades, all the achievements, as a matter of fact, was because we have a management to direct the continent.
Right.
In the last 5 years, 4 years, for example, where Madam Dr. Zuma was the commissioner, I think she produced a very important document. We call it Agenda of Africa 2063.
Right.
This agenda is having a multidimensional targets, about, say, 7 targets to be achieved in the coming 50 years. The first target, as we expect, is to start it, should be started this year, to create a Africa trade, one Africa trade market. You could say free trade Africa, or African free trade. And it should start this year, 2017. And it already issued the first passport for African personnel. And it gave this passport to some of the leaders, and our president already got one.
Right.
And this gives you the chance, as an African, to move free all over the continent, all over the 54 countries in the continent. This is hope. Everything in Africa started by hopes.
Right.
And now it is realized step by step.
What strides do you think have been made so far towards achieving the aims of Agenda 2063? And is the continent, from your point of view, on the right track?
You mean...
this Agenda 2063 has aims.
Yes.
Is Africa as a continent on the right track to achieving those aims?
Of course, we are expecting most of the countries to integrate with this agenda. As a matter of fact, the agenda is decomposed in 10 years. Now, the first decade or the first program of the agenda started from, I think, 2015 till 2025. And this agenda aims to increase the rate of growth of the countries in Africa at least by 6% in general, as an average, to reduce the problem of the latent problem malaria, HIV/AIDS, to get rid of hunger, at least in the continent, and increase the prosperity of the people, to integrate the African by creating infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, creating good communication among the countries, also moving ahead to create a integration among the 5 African economic groups, the COMESA, SADC, ECAS, and the ECOWAS, and these groups The success of moving ahead toward the agenda is, different from group of the countries to other groups. And you look at the ECOWAS group and the West, they are moving ahead very quickly in integrating in the financial sector. They now almost have one currency. They're moving to the borderless trade. They are creating one army to combat the civil wars in the area. On the east side, where COMESA and EAC and SADC, they are already signed the tripartite agreement, which is already going to create one trade area, which is going to be the biggest in the continent, with 500 million people in this group, and creating another communication and transportation links through the node number 4, which connecting Alexandria to Gaborone in Botswana. And now Egypt is ahead with the African Union to create the Nile connection from Victoria Lake till Alexandria, which is another achievement. And here also we have to see what our president mentioned yesterday by giving a signal that Aswan is going to be the capital for economic and culture for Africa. This is going to be a hub to bring the strengths of communication, transportation, trade, and culture among the African countries. Choosing Aswan is a very smart choice, because Aswan a long time ago was part of the Nubi group, and we were connected to Somalia, connecting to Uganda, and this is another revival of our identity as an African country.
Speaking of our identity as an African country, the president has made it key to his policy to return back to Africa, if you will, and to improve relations with African countries. How do you evaluate Egypt's relationship with the African continent under President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi?
We have to cope up with the difficulties of the past.
Right.
We were almost isolated from our mother continent for one reason or another. In the last decade, few decades, 3 decades, we're almost cut off our continent. You imagine a country like Egypt with its history deep in all African countries. In African countries almost think that we try to isolate ourselves from Africa.
Right.
While they always saying that we are proud that Egypt is a part of the continent. And this is a shame for us. And I think it's good that we are now in process of revitalizing our relation to regain our identity as an African country. And the insistence of our president, as a matter of fact, to be part of all activities in the continent, this is great and recommended from all the Egyptians to be back to our roots. We still have a long way to go.
Right.
And I ask many activities to be, I wish that many activities to be integrated in the continent, like our banks.
Right.
Our banks is not really integrated like other banks in the continent. Not only banks, or other companies in Egypt. There are some good cases, but it is very, very minor compared to our existence. We are 90 million people in the country. We are the first in the in this you say in the world, and first in Africa.
Right.
And we are the part of this growing continent. We should taking the lead in many ways.
How would a continental free trade area, which is meant to be established sometime this year, how would that obviously affect each and every country and the continent at large?
This is, there are at least three main requests to make this free trade area working. Number one is to establish proper infrastructure. Proper infrastructure means transportation, and already, alhamdulillah, we could say that we have already opened the Angola-Arkin connection, which is really connecting Egypt now to the mainland of the continent. This going to take products from Egypt to the middle part of the continent and bringing products from the African countries to Egypt and making a bus. This is a transit point to Europe as well. The infrastructure needs communication, needs connections, and the life will be hiving around this new road. The second request, second important request, second demand is to prepare financial structure. The financial structure means you have to create links through banks and integrate your money with the money of these countries. And this eventually means that we need one currency, like the East, like the West part of the continent. Number three, which I think is very important, is to create value chains between your activities in agriculture, industry, services, with the other activities in this part of the world. And of course, this means that we have to overcome the difficulties of custom barriers or non-customs barriers. We have also to cope up with the problem of the language. We have also to cope up with the problem of information. And these are very important for us. We have, our future in Africa. This is in a nutshell.
Okay, I thank you very much. I'm going to end it there with those words. Thank you very much, Dr. Farouk Shaqwi, African Affairs expert. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.